Okay. So it is to this day unclear how many boys that Sidney Cook and his gang are responsible for. The gang's secrets came to light in the 1980s. Yeah, Shivy, message me on my other account, tell me a bit about it and I'll get you on. Sidney made no secret of how he enjoyed his evil acts against defenceless children. Yep, mods, can you just, these people are asked to be unblocked, can you please just screenshot for them for me? And then we'll look into it and then I'll unblock them on the main account. So he was absolutely really happy when the police would interview him about these boys because he would love going into graphic detail and shocking the police about what he had done. Sidney Cook enjoyed reliving the horrific attacks and murders, where the majority took place in rundown areas like Kingsmead Estate in Hackney, East London. Here he set up flats where he would charge other men £5 a time to come in and take part in the rape of these children. Now, he would get, some of these kids were runaways, homeless. Some of these were what they would refer to back in the day of rent boys, and others were from a fairground that Sidney Cook used to work at in order to get the children to come to him, and amusements and stuff like that. So he tended to stay in places where children would kind of gather around. He would use his job to lure young boys and would either abduct them or lure them back to the flat at Kingsmead with promises of sweets, alcohol and money. Sidney's evil gang would take the boys back to the flat and subject them to horrific sexual assaults, and they would last hours and sometimes days. There are some cases of missing boys who vanished that have never been solved but come from around that area, and they are likely to be connected. Now, we're going to talk about, first of all, let me talk about this boy here. Just because of the way the notes go, let me put him up. So we're going to talk about Jason Swift first. Let me tell you a bit about Jason Swift. Make it bigger so you can see. So this is Jason Swift, and he was only 14 years of age when he was sleeping rough on the streets of London. His family begged him to come home, but for whatever reason he chose not to. We think probably, and the majority of the people think, that the reason why he was in your class, Chevy, fuck. Most people think that because by this time he was already caught up in the lifestyle of the streets and the addiction to drugs, that he didn't want to go home. Now, around this week where he went missing, he did say to people locally that he had plans to return to his family, although he never got to. It was revealed that Jason had been doing some sex work for money, and this was how he was surviving. Now, he was a very handsome young man, and he was soon spotted by Sidney and company to take back to the flat, where each member of the gang agreed to pay Jason £5 to have sex with him. They gave him alcohol and drugs and then proceeded to take turns, and the horrific ordeal, which was so sadistic, and I cannot tell you too much about it because it's so heartbreaking. They took part in the abuse of his body until his body could take no more, and he died. The horrific details of the rape and the brutality of what happened to Jason is the stuff of pure nightmares. When Jason was deceased, death was later deemed to be strangulation during sexual assault. They wrapped him up and carried his body out of the flat, which was said to be a regular occurrence, that the gang would be seen carrying what looked like rolled up pieces of rug or carpet, and then they placed him into a car. His body was later found in a shallow grave just outside of London, causing his mum to forever weep that she never got to see her son again. The paedophile gang led by Sidney Cook was said to have included Robert Oliver, Lenny Smith, Leslie Bailey, Stephen Barrell, who had close links to two prolific paedophiles, Bill Malcolm and former Scouts master Brian Turner. Over the years, various names have been linked to Sidney Cook, even serial killer couple Fred and Rosemary West. Now, Sidney was born on the 18th of April 1927 in Stroud, Gloucestershire, where the Wests are from, as well as certain politicians, which is a whole other rabbit hole we can go through one day, but there's thought to be many men that would visit the place where, there'd be many men that would visit that particular place where he would hold children, including high-level politicians. Hey, Ange. Leslie Bailey had been arrested and jailed for his part in the abuse of a young boy, and whilst in prison, he bragged about the gang's sickening activities at the Den of Horror. Word got back to investigators that Leslie was bragging, and they wanted to see if he would reveal some of the details, as they had a series of missing children on their books. and one they were interested in talking to him about was 6-year-old Barry Lewis. The police believe the murders of Jason Swift and Barry Lewis were connected, as both boys were found near to each other, their bodies days apart. To their surprise, Leslie happily spilled the horrific details and told police that Barry had been abducted by the gang and the 6-year-old had been drugged and passed around many of the men in the apartment. After these months, he had been drugged and passed around until he was near death. After these monsters had finished these sickening acts, they conducted the same routine with Barry, wrapped his body up, took him out into the car. But this time they had a problem. Barry managed to suddenly move and sat up in the back seat of the car. Leslie confessed he had murdered Barry as a child, cried and screamed for his mother. I can't even, those words. Oh, to know that he died screaming for his mummy. Leslie confessed that he had done this and he had disposed of his body in the same way that they had Jason's. Now, the rest of the gang were under the spotlight for not only Barry's horrific abuse and the murder of Leslie, but information he shared with the police about Jason. The investigators now knew the murders of the two boys were linked and by the same perpetrators. One of the appalling facts about this case is the way in which authorities handled the murder of Jason Swift. Now, Jason Swift, now you have to you remember, like back in this time, the way they reported on his case and the language they used was so horrific and disgusting. Because he had run away, because they said he was like what they would call like a rent boy, the language they used about this 14-year-old boy with addiction and kind of street kid and kind of almost like he wasn't the perfect victim, like he was not as deserving of kind of like sadness as Barry was, being 6. I know, Suze, I'm trying to be really respectful and not go into it too much. They really kind of spoke about him in a way that was just equally horrific to his parents, having to read it back when it was actually their son and their baby. Like, he had found his way onto a street life where it had sucked him in and he couldn't escape from it. But he was 14 and who knows what would happen when he was 24, 34, 44, 54. Like, you know, he had the absolute ability to go on and do such amazing things and really flip the script on what was going on. And instead, people were just so disrespectful in the telling of his story. Now, because they said they couldn't easily tell whether he had wanted to be there or not, because of what he did for work, they said, they only charged him with manslaughter instead of murder, because they were like, well, he worked on the streets, you know, that's what he did for work. We have to acknowledge this, right? Whether you are paying a child or whether you're doing it for free, rape is rape. He's 14, he can't consent, he can't agree to nothing. So the fact that you're almost like, well, this one wanted to and this one didn't, this is a sex game gone wrong, this is rape and murder. The whole language of how they talked about, and that's why I wanted to cover these cases in one way, because of the kind of sympathy we put on a victim sometimes is completely different. Now, he didn't want this to happen to him. He didn't want to go with these men. He didn't like what was done to him. He was raped and murdered. Exactly the same as Barry and Mark, we will go on to talk about in a minute. And the way that these people spoke about children, we know with the grooming gangs back in the 80s and 90s, they were calling them throwaway kids. Like, these kids already only give a fuck up anyway. Like, who cares about these kids? They come from drug addict parents, so we don't care about them. It's just the way you would read even the newspaper headlines is so shocking back then. Thank you for everyone with the help the gift going all heart me's. It just breaks my heart, really breaks my heart. We're popular number 10. Thank you, guys. Because of this situation, they sentenced these guys to manslaughter, and Sidney Cook went from being given 19 years, which was for the horrendous rape and murder of a child, which was bad enough, but he ended up only serving 9 years and being released back onto the streets. Now, the murder of Jason, like I just said, Jason Swift, they called it in the newspapers a homosexual orgy. That's what they called it. So they called Barry's a horrific rape and murder, and they called Jason's a homosexual orgy. That was the difference in the wording. They said it just went wrong partly due to the fact that Jason had been working the street and likely had agreed to be there because he'd been paid. A high-profile missing case then came about in the disappearance of a 7-year-old boy that most people will remember this little boy's face, Mark Tildsey. Mark Tildsey was brought up in Leslie Bailey's conversation with the police. He claimed that Mark had fallen victim to Sydney and the gang, and this was later confirmed by other gang members. Another known paedophile named Lenny Smith, along with Sidney Cook, was named as the killers of the young boy, but due to the fact the accusers were all part of the gang, authorities claimed their word could not be taken seriously as they were also peddlers, so they did not have any respect with the police. Leslie was the only one who confessed to being part of Mark's murder, but for some reason he got the book thrown at him and was sentenced to 2 life sentences. He died in 1993 after being murdered by 2 of his cellmates, thank God. Sidney Cook was released in 1998 to public outcry, and during this time the police had reopened various unsolved cases of young boys disappearing around the time the gang were active. Sidney got arrested again in 1999. He was found guilty of sexual abuse of 2 brothers and given a 5-year jail term. When the 5 years was up, he was refused parole. Since then, he's continued to be refused parole because he's deemed a danger to children. And he himself has admitted if he is released, he will abuse more children. It seems he does not want to be released from prison, as he enjoys boasting to investigators about his crimes with not a shred of remorse. And I'm going to tell you all about Mark's case in a minute in detail. And let's just go into Mark's case a little bit because I want to tell you about Mark. His body has still never been recovered to this day. This is a picture of his parents who his bike was found and they were absolutely devastated, and his mum was just absolutely broken by the fact that this gang refused to ever give up his body. And Sidney Cook, everybody is hopeful that he will give up Mark's remains before he dies, but this man is not going to. He enjoys the game, he enjoys the control, he is never going to give up Mark's remains. It has been years at this point. Like, can we try and do the gift goal, guys, if you don't mind? We don't want to let these people win. Right, let me just quickly get to Mark's case because I do want to talk a little bit. So, Mark was going to the fun fair. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much. Let's coffee quickly. I'm allowed to drink Carlo today. So, Mark Tilsley worked really hard to earn some money off his mum that day to go to the fun fair. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Mish. He wanted to go and ride the Dodgems. 7-year-old Mark Tilsley was described affectionately by his mother as a live wire, a little boy who was so full of life he couldn't be contained inside of his body. He was just always go, go, go. Despite his... Oh, Amy, you are a mod. I thought I'd not modded you on here yet. Can I move that? Oh, God, what have I done? Ooh, it's getting all kinds of wrong. Why does it come back up? Okay, thank you. I put it down the bottom. Okay. So, despite his mischievous ways, thank you, thank you, Claire, Mark was great at getting home for curfew. So when he asked his father to go to the fun fair, although he was 7, times were different, and he was told to be home by 7:30. It was the half-term break from school and the Frank Ayres fun fair was in town, just a short bike ride away from Mark's home in Wokingham in Berkshire. He had 30 pence, roughly £1.30 in today's value, per week, which wasn't enough, so he earned money by putting trolleys back at Tesco's and collecting the 10 pence from the trolley that he managed to save up to go to the fair. On June the 1st, 1984, Mark had gone to a sweet shop near the Tesco's where he had met a man who gave him 50p for sweets. The fun fair was mentioned and how Mark's favourite ride was the Dodgems, also known as the bumper cars, and the stranger told Mark he'd give him more money at the Dodgems if he met him there. Thank you, Gillian. So Mark could ride his favourite ride more. So this is a stranger who's met him in his local shops, give him 50p and said to him, if you meet me at the fun fair, I'll give you some more money to ride the Dodgems, which obviously back then there was such an unawareness of just kind of the danger, which is so sad and so tragic that he's not here. But at 7:30 it came and went. Mark's parents grew a little worried and they hoped he'd just lost track of time. But after 30 minutes, Lavina and John decided to take the dog for a walk to the fun fair, and they found Mark's golden rally tomahawk bicycle chained outside of the fair. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for the snowboards as well. They searched high and low for Mark, but when they didn't find him, Mark's parents decided they needed to contact the police, and that call was made around 10 p.m. and law enforcement was quick to start searching. Now, people have always said, why the difference in time? Now, you've got to remember, we didn't have cell phones back then. So you look around, you can't find him, you look throughout the fun fair, then you walk the dog back home, you check no one around is seen, then you phone the police. It wasn't a time when right there you spot the bike and you phone the police. You've got to get the bike home, you've got to look for your son. I completely understand that gap in time. Now, for 4 months, the police worked hard around the clock to search for Mark, the 7-year-old boy who was all over the newspapers. They received more than 1,200 calls from the public and following up on 2,500 possible leads. Thank you. The only thing Mark had to show up, the only thing they had show up from the whole thing was the golden bicycle. Years would go by with only speculation until a convicted paedophile confessed to abducting Mark from the fun fair and sexually abusing him. This confession stemmed from the police having 2 massive operations looking into paedophilic sex rings in the East End of London. I don't want to battle. Operation Stranger was set up on the 17th of January 1986 to investigate the 1985 murders of 6-year-old Barry Lewis and 14-year-old Jason Swift. In April of the same year, it was announced that Operation Stranger were also interested in attacks on 3 other boys. That was a 6-year-old boy from Brighton who was the victim of a vicious attack by a man in a car in August of 1983. He has never been named because he survived. 8-year-old Vishal Mitrova, which I've done his case before, who was kidnapped from Putney High Street in July of 1981, and his body was found in Surrey, and to this day there have never been any convictions for what happened to him. And Mark Tildsey. From Operation Stranger, 12 paedophiles known as the Dirty Dozen were convicted for various crimes against various children. Thank you, Kirsty. The shortest sentence that one of them got for these horrific attacks was 1 year probation, and the most they got was 8 years. Not long enough, considering they were convicted for an array of sex crimes that happened over a 20-year period. But this wasn't the end of Operation Stranger. On April the 17th, 1987, a call to the Hackney Crime Squad investigated a complaint about a 4-year-old who was being abused by their babysitter. Later that night, an anonymous phone call led to the arrest of 46-year-old Alan Brent, who had been abusing the 4-year-old. Brent confessed that he molested the child and has similar convictions dating back 2 decades. And it quickly became apparent this was not an isolated incident. And he was a part of the Dirty Dozen, and also other members of the family had been subjected to abuse by him. The police inquiry began the Brent inquiry at this point, uncovering a catalogue of abuse against families Brent and his gang babysat for. This group systematically wormed its way into working class families with the sole purpose of gaining access to their young children to abuse them. As the net widened, the police officers of the Brent inquiry realised that this group was likely connected to the murder of Jason Swift, which is where it was all connected back to Mark Tildsey. The suspects and others connected to the case of the Brent inquiry brought forward a key witness. The witness, as a boy, had been abused by the Brent and his group and gave the police detailed reports about his abuse, what his 2 younger brothers and other male relatives went through. One account he gave was that he had been taken to Holt's shoe shop in Hackney and met Jason Swift. Jason, according to the witness, had been sent to a flat owned by Robert Oliver in the Kingsmere estate in London. Detectives then tracked down Robert Oliver to a flat occupied by Leslie Bailey, who he shared a room with, and Bailey's mother, who also lived at the flat. Bailey was present in the room, and the pair shared when the detectives arrested Oliver. Oliver was questioned about Jason Swift's murder, admitting he knew of the boy's death and that he'd met him several times through Lenny Smith and Sidney Cook. His previous lodgings were searched and 3 bottles of prescription diazepam were found. The same drug was found in the bodies of Barry Lewis and Jason Swift. Oliver was charged with indecent assault on Jason. There was insufficient evidence to charge him in connection with the murder. Without a definitive account of Jason's murder, the police decided to interview that bloke he was sharing a room with, Leslie Bailey, who gave the police his complete confession about Jason's murder, an accurate account of where Jason had been buried, leading them to find Jason's body and just nearby Barry Lewis's. 4 men were sentenced on May the 15th, 1989, for the murder of 14-year-old Jason Swift. Were you? Sidney Cook, 62, was sentenced to 19 years. Leslie Bailey, 35, was sentenced to 15 years. Robert Oliver, 34, was sentenced to 15 years. And Stephen Barrell, 28, was sentenced to 13 and a half years. These convictions then triggered Operation Orchid in August 1989 as an attempt to bring justice to boys like Mark Tildsey and Barry Lewis, who had still not had any justice. It was also massively instigated by the Bailey cellmate Ian Gabb, who told police about Bailey's further confessions. Yeah, this is because at this point, they really saw Jason, 14-year-old Jason, as a willing victim. They saw him as someone who had got caught up in a homosexual sex encounter and he had died. They really put it down as an orgy. Like, that this was a little boy who they broke down over several days after all telling him they were going to give him money, and he probably thought that he would be able to use it to get home to his mum or for his addiction, whatever way, and then he was trapped and drugged and beaten and hurt. Like, he was broken when they found his body. And you try to dress it up as, well, you know, it's a sex game gone wrong. He's a child. The way they talked about things back then, like women who were prostitutes, they talked about them like horrifically. Like, you know, just every kind of way when you couldn't have any kind of sympathy or empathy towards people. The media were cruel and horrific. I don't know if you guys remember, a while ago I interviewed a cousin of a girl who had died in a car crash where her paedophile boyfriend was driving the car. He was in his 40s, she was like 14, I think. And the way the papers covered it was something the family was still trying to put right to this day, because they talked about it in such a horrific way. They were saying her boyfriend and all this, and she was like, no, it was her abuser. Why can't they like address what it is? Like, she was a kid. It was just horrific. So Ian was then placed in the same cells as three of Jason's murderers, and first was Leslie, then it was Robert Oliver, and then finally Sidney Cook. He worked with the police not for special favours, because he was revolted by the crimes committed by these men. He even offered to prolong his prison stay to get the information for them. One of the letters that Ian wrote about Cook read, "Dear Mr. Richard, I moved in with Sidney Cook yesterday into a cell. Please God, don't ever let this man walk the street again. He continually talks about sex with children. It's really sickening. I can tell you there are probably 25 to 30 children buried out there. Cook had already admitted to me that he'd seen about 15 killed. He boasted this figure. All I write is the truth. The only part that is missing is the creepy feeling out of evil I get when I listen to Cook tell me of these events. I cannot relate the fear I feel for the children everywhere every time this man Cooks laughs and squeals in delight as he tells me the things he's done to these children." He was the ringleader. Some of the letters Ian sent included detailed maps drawn by Bailey of where some of the bodies were buried. The police publicly started a search based on this information in a car park adjacent to the Clapton synagogue. They did find evidence of a body being buried there, but it had since been moved. 3 months after these searches, in July of 1990, Leslie Bailey confessed of his involvement in Barry Lewis's murder, the 6-year-old, in 1985. He was still serving 15 years for Jason Swift's murder when he was sentenced to life on June the 24th, 1991 for Barry's murder. Bailey would go on to confess to his involvement in Mark Tilsley's abduction and murder in the 1990s. He was charged with the murder and the only person ever to be connected to Mark's murder. The prosecution in the case said that Bailey and his lover, Lenny Smith, travelled from London to Wokingham after being called by Sidney Cook. They went to meet Cook at the Frank Ayres Fun Fair, Smith splitting from Bailey to find their friend. When Bailey saw Cook, he was dragging a small boy by the hand, and the small boy was trying to resist. This boy was Mark, the boy that Sidney Cook said he had earlier met at a sweet shop and gave him 50 pence to ride the Dodgems. And Mark then ended up going to the Dodgems to meet Sidney Cook to get some more money for the Dodgems, who turned out to be a prolific abuser and paedophile. The men worked together to put Mark in a car before driving the short distance to Cook's caravan. Here Mark was drugged by spiked milk, raped by the three men, and murdered by strangulation during the assaults. This attack was deemed the introduction of Bailey to the pedo gang the Smith, Cook and other men both mentioned being a part of. Bailey alleged that he had begun to panic when Mark showed no signs of life and couldn't find a pulse, but Cook reassured him it would be fine. He said to him, "Don't worry, I'll take him home, he'll be fine." Bailey claims he had no idea Mark had died as he went home, but the prosecution argued that he did know and he must have known. He was allowed to plead for manslaughter based on the lack of intent and also the fact that he'd willingly confessed to buggery. How does that mean you get off? This is an outdated law which criminalises intercourse between men and originally included bestiality as well, which is how they used to see people from the gay community, and now they're using it to explain why it's okay to do it to children. I don't understand. He was later sentenced to 2 additional life sentences for Mark's murder. Now, I will just say to anyone who goes on to research any of these cases, they are absolutely horrific. And a lot of the newspaper clippings referred to it as they had sex with the men, not rape. Yeah, he's 98 and he's still going. He's in prison. They don't talk about this kindly at all. And when I look back through old articles and stuff, I was just devastated by how they're referring to these children. Like, these children died in sex games gone wrong. No, like, why are you talking? It can't be me, I don't think, because my internet's good. Is it me? Let me try this, hang on. Buffing? I'm very buff. The Crown Prosecution Service decided after Bailey was charged, no further action was going to be taken towards prosecuting the other men. Nor would there be any further action in the murders of Barry Lewis or Jason Swift. On October the 7th, 1903, Bailey was found strangled to death in his cell with 2 inmates charged with his murder. They should have been given an award. Lenny Smith wasn't charged with Mark's murder, but in April 1992 he was sentenced to 10 years for the buggery of a 6-year-old boy. Again, it was rape. Cook was released in April 1998 after appealing, allowing his 19-year-old sentence for murder to Jason Swift to be dropped to 16 years. He was rearrested at 72 and given 2 life sentences for a series of sexual abuse on 2 brothers committed 20 years previously. Sadly, Mark's body has never been found, and his parents are no longer alive to see him put to rest, even if he is found. Lavina passed away 27 years after his death at the age of 75, where his father John passed away just 6 years before her. And it was absolute tragedy. I literally, his remains have never been found. He was just 7. His mum struggled so much, not just with what had happened to him, or not even knowing the full extent because his body had never been found, but never been able to lay him to rest. She was from a good Catholic family who believed that was really important.